My name is Diana Helson, and 3 months ago, I was the senior account manager at Green Bay Consultants handling our biggest contract, Apex Dynamics, a $4.2 million deal spanning 18 months. I'd cultivated that relationship for 9 months. 9 months of late-night calls, site visits, strategy sessions, and building trust with their CFO, Margaret Yates. I remember the first meeting with Margaret like it was yesterday. She'd walked into our conference room with a leather portfolio under one arm and an expression that said she'd already evaluated 3 other consulting firms that morning. Sharp blazer, sharper questions. Within 10 minutes, she'd identified 2 weaknesses in our initial proposal that my previous supervisor had missed entirely. "Ms. Helson," she'd said, not unkindly, "I don't need another firm that tells me what I want to hear. I need a partner who'll tell me what I need to know. Can you do that?" I could. And I did. For 9 months, I became the person she called when timeline pressures collided with budget realities, when stakeholders disagreed, when she needed someone to shoot straight. We weren't friends, this was business, but we had something more valuable, mutual respect earned through consistent delivery. Then Stephanie Crowley became our new director. Stephanie called me into her office on a Tuesday morning. Sleek blazer, practiced smile, the kind of woman who mistakes confidence for competence. Her office still smelled like fresh paint from the renovations she'd ordered her first week, everything redecorated in shades of corporate gray and motivational white. "Diana, I'm making some strategic shifts," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. The folder had tabs. Color-coded tabs. She'd put effort into this presentation. "I'm reassigning the Apex account to Colin. Colin Winters. The guy who'd been with the company for 6 months and whose biggest accomplishment was landing a mid-tier retail client through his college roommate's connection. I'd sat in on his presentation to that client, 45 slides with more stock photos than data, but he delivered it with the kind of confidence that made people forget to ask hard questions. "Stephanie, I've been building that relationship since." "I understand." Her smile never wavered. She had this way of smiling that made it impossible to tell if she was pleased or preparing to fire you. "But Colin connects better with decision-makers. He has that executive presence. You're excellent with the groundwork, the detail work, but for accounts this size, we need someone who can operate at that level." Executive presence. That's code. We both knew it. Code for tall, code for male, code for the kind of person who dominates a room by simply assuming they belong there. Never mind that Margaret had explicitly told me she hated working with consultants who prioritized style over substance. Never mind that groundwork meant the strategic frameworks Colin would inevitably claim as his own. Margaret specifically requested to continue working with me. Margaret will adapt. Clients say that, but they're actually quite flexible when presented with competent alternatives. She stood, smoothing her skirt, a gesture I'd seen her do a dozen times when she wanted to signal a conversation was over. "This is about what's best for Green Bay. We need to position our strongest players on our highest value accounts." Strongest players. I'd closed 15 major deals with a 97% retention rate. Colin had closed 1 deal, and that client had already called twice to complain about missed deliverables that I'd had to quietly fix. "I need you to brief Colin by Thursday. Full transition. Client history, ongoing initiatives, relationship dynamics, potential risk areas. You know the drill." I walked out of that office with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. 10 years at this company. A spotless track record. Multiple industry awards for client satisfaction. And I was being sidelined for a guy whose biggest skill was looking good in a suit and laughing at the right jokes during leadership meetings. But here's the thing about me, I know when to fight and when to document. My mother was a paralegal for 30 years. She taught me early, paper trails protect you when memory fails and politics prevail. I went back to my desk, opened a new folder on my encrypted drive, and started documenting everything. The date of Stephanie's directive. Margaret's previous communications expressing satisfaction with our partnership. The performance metrics that justified my continued role. I also pulled Colin's file. His performance reviews were glowing but vague, lots of words like dynamic and engaging without concrete metrics. His actual numbers told a different story: missed deadlines, client complaints that were quietly buried, a tendency to overpromise and underdeliver that somehow never made it into official reviews. I briefed Colin with meticulous professionalism. Every detail. Every nuance. Every landmine. We sat in conference room B for 3 hours while I walked him through 9 months of relationship building, strategic decisions, and the delicate ecosystem of personalities at Apex. Margaret values directness, I told him, pulling up my notes. No corporate speak. She'll respect you if you're honest about limitations. Last month, when we hit a snag with the implementation timeline, I called her immediately and proposed 3 alternative approaches. She appreciated the transparency. He nodded, barely taking notes. His notebook sat open on the table with maybe 4 bullet points scrawled across the first page. Meanwhile, I was handing him a 40-page transition document with client preferences, communication styles, technical specifications, and relationship history. The pricing structure has 0 flexibility, we've already negotiated to our minimum threshold. If they push back, you redirect to added value, not discounts. We're at $4.2 million because that reflects actual costs plus reasonable margin. Anything less and we're operating at a loss. Got it, got it. He glanced at his phone. Colin, are you absorbing this? Diana, I appreciate the detail, but I've been managing executives since my consulting days at, he named a firm I'd never heard of, I know how to handle powerful women. The key is establishing authority early, showing them you're the expert. They respond to confidence. That phrase. Handle powerful women. Like Margaret was a temperamental horse that needed breaking rather than a seasoned executive who commanded a $200 million division. I should have recorded it. I should have pushed back harder. But I was still operating under the assumption that professional competence would eventually speak for itself. That if I just did everything right, thorough transition, complete documentation, perfect handoff, the system would self-correct. I was wrong. And Colin? I looked him directly in the eye. Margaret doesn't respond well to being patronized. Treat her like the expert she is. She's been in this industry for 20 years. She knows her business better than we do. He laughed, that easy confident laugh that probably served him well at networking events. Diana, trust me. I've got this. You did great establishing the relationship, but now it's time for the strategic play. That's what I do. I stepped aside. What else could I do? I had my other accounts, my integrity, and a growing folder of documentation that I hoped I'd never need to use. I watched him walk away from that conference room with my transition document tucked under his arm, already pulling out his phone to check messages. And I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach, the kind of premonition you get when you've just handed over something precious to someone careless. 3 days. That's how long it took. I was in a strategy meeting with the analytics team, reviewing quarterly projections for my remaining accounts, when Stephanie burst in. Her face was pale, that practiced smile completely gone. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, looked like she'd been running her hands through it repeatedly. Diana, I need you. Now. The room went silent. Everyone looked at me, then at Stephanie, calculating what crisis could make a director interrupt a senior staff meeting. We rushed to her office. She closed the door, leaned against it, actually leaned against it like her legs might give out. Apex terminated the contract. The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. For a moment, I couldn't process them. Couldn't connect the sentence to reality. What? Margaret called me directly. 20 minutes ago. She's withdrawing from the partnership, effective immediately. Invoking the early termination clause. Stephanie's voice cracked. She pressed her fingers to her temples, a gesture I'd never seen from her before. She was furious. I've never heard anyone that angry and that controlled at the same time. It was worse than yelling. She was cold. What happened? I don't know. That's why you're here. You need to call her, fix this, figure out what Colin did, what we can salvage. Stephanie. I kept my voice level, watching her panic unfold. You removed me from the account. Margaret doesn't report to me anymore. I have no standing to call her. I know, but you had the relationship. Had. Past tense. I let that sink in, watching her realize the position she'd put us both in. What did Colin say happened? She pushed off from the door, paced to her desk, gripped the edge of it. He said the call went fine. That they discussed the timeline adjustments and pricing optimizations. That Margaret was being emotional and unprofessional, and that she'd cool down. He said women executives sometimes react badly to confident leadership but usually come around. Emotional and unprofessional. Margaret Yates, who runs a $200 million division and negotiates with Fortune 100 companies without breaking a sweat, was being emotional. Margaret, who once told me she admired people who could disagree with her professionally because it meant they respected her enough to be honest. Let me make some calls, I said. Who? People who might actually tell me the truth. Chapter 4, The Investigation. I didn't call Margaret first. I called Olivia Chen at Apex, Margaret's executive assistant and someone I'd built rapport with over months of coordination. Olivia was the gatekeeper, the person who controlled Margaret's calendar and knew everything happening in that office. She'd saved me multiple times with early warnings about schedule conflicts or shifting priorities. Diana. Her voice dropped to a whisper immediately. Are you okay? We heard you got pulled from our account. I'm fine. Olivia, can you tell me what happened with Colin? Silence. Then, you don't know? I know the contract's terminated. I don't know why. Hold on. I heard a door close, footsteps, then another door. She'd moved to a private space. Okay. Diana, he was. God, where do I start? He called Margaret sweetheart in the first meeting. My stomach dropped. Actually dropped, like someone had cut the cables on an elevator. Then he completely ignored the pricing structure you negotiated. Offered a 15% discount without authorization, like he was doing us a favor. When Margaret said she needed to review the revised timeline, he said, and I quote, I know you ladies like to overthink things, but trust me, this is the best approach. I closed my eyes, seeing my meticulous transition document gathering dust on Colin's desk, unread. It gets worse, Olivia continued. He kept interrupting her. Literally talked over her 3 times when she was trying to explain our internal approval processes. And then, this is what really did it, he said that you were great at the groundwork but that now we needed strategic thinking, implying you'd just been taking notes and he was the real strategist. Olivia, please tell me someone recorded this. The meeting was virtual. Standard protocol, everything gets recorded and stored in our system for compliance. Margaret already sent it to legal. Legal. That meant Margaret wasn't just angry. She was building a case. Can you send me the footage? Diana, I could lose my job. Olivia, I would never ask if it wasn't important. If what you're describing is accurate, this goes beyond one terminated contract. This is a pattern that needs to stop. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. And between you and me, I think Margaret might want this on record. She doesn't terminate partnerships lightly. A long pause. Then, give me an hour. I'll send it from my personal email to yours. Never say where you got it. You have my word. The footage arrived exactly 63 minutes later. I locked my office door, closed the blinds, and opened the video file with the kind of dread you feel before watching something you know will be terrible. It was worse than I imagined. Colin's face filled the screen, that executive presence Stephanie valued so much on full display, smug, condescending, utterly oblivious to the frost forming in Margaret's expression. He positioned himself dead center in the camera frame, probably thought it made him look authoritative. Good morning, sweetheart, he started, bright and cheerful. Great to finally connect face to face. Diana's told me so much about you. Margaret's smile was glacial. Ms. Yates is fine, Mr. Winters. Of course, of course. Margaret it is. He completely missed, or ignored, the correction. So I've been reviewing the account, and I've identified several optimization opportunities that I think will really enhance our partnership. He pulled up a slide deck. My slide deck. The strategic framework I'd built over months of analyzing Apex's needs, rebranded with his name in the footer. Sweetheart, I think you're getting caught up in the weeds here, he said when Margaret questioned a timeline change. The casual condescension in his voice made my skin crawl. Margaret's jaw tightened. Her hands, clasped in front of her on the desk, tightened too. Mr. Winters, I'm examining the contract terms you've unilaterally altered without explanation or authorization. Right, but these are just optimization adjustments. You know how it is, sometimes the technical folks get too focused on the details and miss the big picture. He leaned back, hands behind his head, actually put his hands behind his head like he was relaxing in his own living room. That's why Diana was great at the groundwork, but for strategic decisions, you need someone who can see the forest for the trees. I watched Margaret's face. I'd seen that expression once before, when a vendor tried to bill her for services never rendered. It was the look of someone calculating exactly how to dismantle you with surgical precision. I see, she said quietly, her voice dropping into that dangerous register that people who don't know her mistake for agreement. And this 15% discount, did your team authorize this adjustment? I took the initiative. When you're dealing with relationships at this level, you need flexibility. Can't be bound by rigid frameworks. He smiled like he'd just offered her a gift. Consider it a gesture of good faith as we transition the account relationship. Flexibility. She smiled. It wasn't friendly. It was the smile of a predator watching prey wander into a trap. Mr. Winters, I'm going to be direct since you value directness. This partnership is terminated, effective immediately. My legal team will be in touch regarding the early termination terms, which, as you'd know if you'd read the contract Diana negotiated, include penalties for vendor-initiated pricing changes. Colin's smile faltered. His hands came down from behind his head. Now, hold on. We're done. She reached forward. The screen went black. I sat back in my chair, the video paused on Colin's confused face frozen in that last frame. This wasn't just incompetence. This was arrogance enabled by a system that valued appearance over ability, competence over competence, style over substance. I saved 3 copies of that video. One on my encrypted drive, one on a USB drive I locked in my desk, one uploaded to a private cloud storage account. Then I started building a file. I requested a meeting with Stephanie. She agreed immediately. Desperation makes people cooperative. Did you reach Margaret? She asked before I'd even sat down. She'd been pacing her office when I arrived. Her desk, usually meticulously organized, was covered with papers and 2 empty coffee cups. I did better than that. I found out what happened. I opened my laptop, turned it toward her. You need to watch this. She watched in silence. With each passing minute, her face grew paler. When Colin called Margaret sweetheart the second time, she actually flinched. When he offered the unauthorized discount, she closed her eyes. When it ended, she looked at me with something between horror and denial. He was trying to build rapport. Stephanie. Stop. She stopped. He called a senior executive sweetheart. Twice. He offered an unauthorized discount that would have cost us $630,000 in revenue. He insulted me to the client while taking credit for my work. And he blamed Margaret's valid concerns on her being a woman who overthinks. I kept my voice level, professional. This isn't a communication style issue. This is liability. Maybe it was just awkwardness. Is that what you want to tell the executive board? That we lost a $4.2 million contract because Colin was awkward? I leaned forward. Or that we lost it because you prioritized executive presence over actual competence, ignored the client's explicitly stated preferences, and removed a performing account manager for someone who tanked the deal in 72 hours? The color drained from her face entirely. She sat down heavily in her chair, no longer even pretending to have control of the situation. What do you want, Diana? It was the question I'd been waiting for. The moment where power shifts and everyone in the room knows it. I want you to call Margaret, take full responsibility, and ask if there's any possibility of salvaging this with me back on the account. And if she says no? Then you explain to the board how this happened. With documentation. With video evidence. With a full accounting of the decision-making process that led to this failure. She looked at the laptop screen, still frozen on that last frame of Colin's confused face. You're going to ruin my career. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. I'm just going to make sure the truth is on record. Stephanie called Margaret on speaker. I sat across from her, watching the director's hand shake slightly as she dialed. She'd pulled up Margaret's direct line from her contacts, hesitated for a moment with her finger over the call button, then pressed it. 3 rings. Then, Stephanie. Margaret's voice was cold, clipped. I wasn't expecting to hear from you again. Margaret, I owe you an apology. A significant one. Stephanie's voice was steady, I'd give her that. Whatever else she lacked, she could perform under pressure. I made a serious error in judgment by reassigning your account. I should have respected both your preferences and Diana's proven track record. Silence on the other end. Long enough that I wondered if Margaret had hung up. Then, continue. I've reviewed what happened with Mr. Winters. His conduct was completely unacceptable, and he'll be facing consequences. I'm calling to ask if there's any possibility of continuing our partnership with Diana back as your primary contact. More silence. Then, put Diana on. Stephanie looked at me. I took a breath, leaned toward the speaker. Hi, Margaret. Diana. Her voice warmed slightly, like ice beginning to thaw at the edges. Did you know about this reassignment beforehand? I found out Tuesday morning. I briefed Colin thoroughly, 3 hours, 40-page transition document, covered every aspect of the relationship. Then I stepped aside as instructed. Stepped aside. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was the laugh of someone who'd seen this pattern too many times before. You know what bothered me most about that call? He took credit for your work while simultaneously explaining why you weren't good enough. The strategy framework he presented? That was yours. I recognized your analysis style, your approach to data visualization, even the specific phrasing you use when you're building a business case. But apparently, you only do groundwork. My throat tightened. Margaret. I terminated because I won't work with people who don't respect talent, Diana. And I won't work with companies that don't value the people who actually do the work. She paused. I could hear papers rustling in the background, the sound of her office. But I didn't want to burn your reputation in the process. When I filed the termination, I made it clear in my documentation that the failure was vendor side, not related to previous account management. Is this what you want? To come back to an account under a director who clearly doesn't appreciate you? It was the question I'd been avoiding. The one that kept me up the previous 3 nights, staring at my ceiling and running scenarios. What I want is to complete the work I started. I believe in this partnership. I believe in what we can accomplish together. I glanced at Stephanie, watching her grip the edge of her desk. And I believe that people can learn from their mistakes, if they're willing to own them. Stephanie? Margaret's voice turned sharp, the executive tone returning. Are you willing to own this? Yes. Stephanie's voice was barely above a whisper. Completely. Then here are my terms. Diana is the sole point of contact for this account. Any strategic decisions go through her. She has full authority to make calls on timeline, deliverables, and resource allocation without additional approval from your office. And I want a formal letter from your CEO acknowledging what happened and committing to review your account assignment practices. Stephanie closed her eyes. Each term was another nail. I'll make it happen. Diana, I'll see you next week. We've lost time, but we can make it up. I'm trusting you to make this right. I will. The call ended. Stephanie and I sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over us like dust after a building collapse. Thank you, she finally said, her voice small. I didn't respond. Because this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Chapter 8, The Executive Board. The CEO, Lawrence Fulton, called an emergency executive meeting 3 days later. The invitation landed in my inbox at 7 a.m. with a subject line that read simply, Apex Dynamics, Postmortem Analysis. I was asked to present what happened. Not Colin, who'd been conspicuously absent from the office since the termination. Not Stephanie, who'd been holed up in back-to-back meetings with legal. Me. The full board sat around the mahogany conference table, Lawrence at the head, CFO Veronica Strauss to his right with a laptop open and fingers poised over the keyboard, COO Philip Green looking grim, and 3 other senior partners whose expressions ranged from curious to concerned. The room smelled like coffee and tension. Stephanie sat at the far end, her executive presence notably diminished. She'd dressed impeccably, navy suit, pearl earrings, but her eyes were shadowed, and her usual confidence had evaporated. I walked them through everything. The reassignment. Colin's performance. The termination. The recovery. I'd prepared a presentation, but Lawrence asked me to just talk through it instead. Give us the story, Diana. Not the corporate summary. So I did. I showed them the video footage. Watching 6 senior executives react in real time to Colin's performance was instructive, the winces when he said sweetheart, The sharp intake of breath when he offered the unauthorized discount, the exchanged glances when he dismissed Margaret's concerns. "Ms. Helson," Veronica said when the video ended, her finger still hovering over her keyboard, "why didn't you escalate your concerns about the reassignment when it happened?" "With respect, to whom would I have escalated? Stephanie is my direct supervisor." I had no concrete reason beyond instinct to question her strategic decision. I documented my concerns, performed the transition professionally, and remained available to support the client relationship. "But you had doubts," Philip pressed, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "I had doubts," I admitted. "But doubts aren't grounds for insubordination." Margaret explicitly requested to continue working with me, which I communicated to Stephanie. Beyond that, I trusted that my director was making informed decisions based on information I might not have access to. "And now?" Lawrence leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Do you trust that?" The room went silent. Everyone looked at me. This was the moment. The political move would be to deflect, to say it was a learning experience for everyone, to preserve the hierarchy and smooth over the conflict with corporate platitudes about growth opportunities. But I was done with political moves. "No, sir. I don't." I looked directly at Stephanie. Her eyes met mine, then dropped. Because this wasn't an isolated mistake. Stephanie prioritized optics over outcomes. She made an assignment based on bias rather than performance metrics. And when it catastrophically failed, her first instinct wasn't accountability, it was to have me fix her problem while she maintained deniability. Stephanie's face flushed. "That's not. You asked if I'd reached Margaret before you told me the contract was terminated. You wanted me to salvage the relationship without acknowledging your role in destroying it." I kept my voice level, factual. "That's not leadership. That's damage control." "Diana," Lawrence started. "I'm not finished." I pulled out another folder, this one significantly thicker. "I've been with Green Bay for 10 years. In that time, I've landed and maintained 15 major accounts with a 97% retention rate. My client satisfaction scores average 4.8 out of 5. I've mentored 6 junior account managers, 4 of whom are now senior staff. But in the past 18 months under Stephanie's leadership, 3 of those accounts were reassigned to newer staff with better executive presence. 2 of those clients have since reduced their contracts by a combined $1.8 million. The third is currently in renegotiation after missing key deliverables, and their CEO has privately indicated they're exploring other vendors." I slid the folder across to Lawrence. Inside was everything: performance data, client feedback, timeline analyses showing declining metrics correlated with Stephanie's reassignments. This is a pattern, not an anomaly. And if we're serious about performance-based advancement, that pattern needs to be addressed. The board meeting ended with no immediate decisions. That's how these things work. Everything happens in private conversations afterward, in phone calls between executives, in carefully worded emails with legal reviewing every sentence. But things started shifting quickly. Colin was terminated within a week. Performance issues, the official statement said, language carefully crafted to avoid liability. The real reason circulated in quieter channels: Green Bay couldn't afford the liability of keeping someone whose incompetence cost them millions and whose behavior bordered on actionable harassment. I heard through the office grapevine that he'd actually argued against the termination, claimed he was being scapegoated for Stephanie's poor management. He wasn't entirely wrong, but he'd still made every disastrous choice in that meeting himself. Stephanie started avoiding me in the halls. When we did interact, her practiced smile was gone, replaced by something harder. Cornered. She looked like someone watching her career circle the drain in slow motion, powerless to stop it. Her meetings with leadership increased. I'd see her being called into Lawrence's office, into Veronica's office, emerging each time looking more diminished. The Whisper Network, that invisible communication system that exists in every organization, started buzzing. People noticed when directors get repeatedly summoned upstairs. They notice when those directors stop participating in strategic planning meetings. Then, 2 weeks after my presentation, I got called to Lawrence's office. His assistant, Gerald, smiled at me as I approached. "He's expecting you. Go right in." Lawrence's office occupied a corner of the top floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He was standing at one of them when I entered, hands in his pockets, looking out at the skyline. "Diana, sit." I sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. He turned, walked over, but didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against his desk, arms crossed, studying me with the kind of attention that made me understand why he'd built this company from 12 people in a rented office to 300 staff across 4 locations. I want to be direct with you. The board has been reviewing the concerns you raised about account management practices under Stephanie's leadership. And we've identified significant patterns of subjective assignment criteria that don't correlate with performance outcomes. In several cases, including yours, high-performing staff were sidelined in favor of individuals who presented well in meetings but couldn't execute. He paused. We also found that client complaints and contract reductions increased notably in the 18 months since Stephanie took the director position. What does that mean for Stephanie? Lawrence's expression was carefully neutral, the face of someone who'd made difficult decisions and learned to live with them. Stephanie has been offered a transition to a non-management advisory role. Reduced responsibility, maintained salary for 6 months to ease the transition, opportunity to rebuild her reputation through individual contributor work. She's declined. Her resignation is effective at the end of the month. I absorbed that. A director, gone. Not fired exactly, but forced out through a combination of evidence, consequences, and the impossibility of maintaining authority after such a public failure. The board would like to offer you the director position. My heart stopped. Actually stopped for what felt like several seconds before lurching back into rhythm. Sir. You've proven you understand client relationships, you develop talent, and you're willing to have difficult conversations when they're necessary. Those are the traits we need in leadership. He leaned back slightly, still watching me. But I'll be honest, you'll face resistance. Some people will say you got here by taking down your boss. That you were calculating, maybe even opportunistic. You need to be prepared for that. With respect, I didn't take down anyone. I documented failures, presented evidence, and advocated for performance-based standards. If that's controversial, then we have bigger problems than who holds which title. He smiled. Actually smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him. That's exactly why you're the right choice. Do you want the job? I thought about Margaret's question during that phone call, is this what you want? To work under a director who doesn't appreciate you. Now I wouldn't have to. Yes, sir. I want the job. Good. We'll announce it Monday. In the meantime, start thinking about how you want to restructure the account management team. Veronica will send you the current performance data. Use it wisely. Stephanie's last day was quiet. No farewell party, no group cards circulated for signatures, no gathering in the break room with sheet cake and awkward speeches. She packed her office in silence, loading boxes into her car through the side entrance while most of the staff pretended not to notice. I saw her once, carrying a box of personal items past my office. Our eyes met briefly. She didn't say anything, and neither did I. What was there to say? Sorry your career imploded? Maybe next time respect talent over appearance? The silence said everything necessary. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in watching someone's career implode, even when they'd earned it through a pattern of poor judgment and biased decision-making. But I also didn't mourn it. Consequences aren't cruelty, they're clarity. They're the universe's way of enforcing accountability when systems fail to.